And about 2 weeks before he was supposed to move out, he got shot and killed. He actually got shot and killed when Jay went back to go visit him. Ended up dying
Wow.
in his arms.
Oh no.
And excuse me, excuse me. And it was in that context that I knew something had to be done about the conditions facing a lot of our young men, a lot of Black males in our communities, a lot of Black and brown males for that matter.
Yeah.
And I decided to engage in a research project to figure out, like, what could we do to help young Black men.
Hi, thank you so much for joining the Falling for Learning podcast. I am TD Blennaw. We have this podcast to help parents and caregivers with having the resources, strategies, and tools needed to make sure that their children are on track for learning and to stay on track for success.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us on the Falling for Learning podcast. We are here today with Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza. He is the executive director of racial equity at the Chief Executive Office of Los Angeles County. He currently lectures in the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. In 2008, he founded the Social Justice Learning Institute and served as its executive director until 2020. He also served on the Inglewood School Board from 2015 to 2020. Scorza earned a PhD in education from UCLA in 2013. He also served as a personnel specialist in the U.S. Navy between 2001 and 2006, completing a tour of duty in Iraq. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Scorza.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. Blennaw.
I'm not doctor.
I'm speaking it into existence. That's I'm manifesting.
Well, it's so good to have you here. Let's just keep it real for the audience. Dr. Scorza is my brother-in-law, so I've known him for many years. He's married to my sister. And so we're glad to have him on our podcast because he is not only a family member, but also has done amazing work in the community for education. And this is what our program is all about, making sure we understand resources and information out there to make sure our kids are on track for learning and stay on track for success.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm incredibly excited to talk to folk about, how we can do work to help improve outcomes and conditions for our young folk in schools and beyond. And I think, I've been happy to see the work, not only of this podcast, but the work you've done in schools and in education, and super excited to share more about how we can advance this work in LA County and beyond.
Well, Dr. Scorza, what made you decide to go into education?
I decided to go into education. I actually wanted to go into law first. Like many, I think, young folk who are like, oh, being a lawyer is the thing you can do, or being an engineer or a doctor. And I thought law, I thought law would be one of the ways that I could help transform outcomes in my community. Having grown up in Inglewood, both in Watson, Inglewood, and having seen many challenges in my community, I thought law would be a way for me to help, bring justice to, my family, to help make sure that, we were able to rectify policies that were having a negative impact on folk in our communities, like, the war on drugs and the war on poverty. So law was really my interest. And it wasn't until the death of one of my family members in 2006, I had just come back from Iraq, and he was going to come and live with me in San Diego. I had another family member who came and live with me, and he said, if the family member, I'll call him Jay for the time being, Jay said, if I don't leave this neighborhood, somebody's gonna kill me. And I said, okay, well, he says, can I come live with you? So he came to live with me. And then another family member wasn't gang involved. He saw what we were doing. I got Jay enrolled in college. He was working.
Yeah.
Excuse me. It was a great, I think, sort of transition. And another family member was graduating high school. And and wanted to come down here wanted to come and live with me in San Diego. And I said, sure, you can come and do that. And about 2 weeks before he was supposed to move out, he got shot and killed. He actually got shot and killed when Jay went back to go visit him. Ended up dying in his arms.
Oh no.
And excuse me. Excuse me. And it was in that context that I knew something had to be done about the conditions facing a lot of our young men, a lot of Black males in our communities, a lot of Black and brown males for that matter.
Yeah.
And I decided to engage in a research project to figure out, like, what could we do to help young Black men deal with the challenges many of us face. My dad was incarcerated at the time. My brothers were incarcerated. I had family members who had been killed in and around Los Angeles. And I said, we got to do something about these conditions. We have too many of our young men locked up. We have too many challenges in our schools. Just we had to do something about it.
Right.
And it was through sort of doing that research and eventually becoming a McNair Research Scholar at UCLA that I was able to build out a program that's centered on helping young men, especially African American men, within schools to, transition out of the carceral system and into pathways of opportunity. And I based it on the Detroit Malcolm X Academy model as well.
Can I just interrupt you for a moment? So you have all this going around you with father, brothers, cousins, all these people, but what made it different for you that you weren't involved in those kind of things?
I will tell you, it's interesting. I had to ask myself that question, and I asked myself that question during my PhD program. Excuse me, because I would go visit my dad in Tehachapi State Prison, and I would sort of always try to figure out what did make me different, and it wasn't so much that I was different from them or from my family or from my brothers or my cousins. They all have the same, I think, in many ways, potential and capability. They're all just as smart, just as brilliant. But what made things different were the people in my life. So it was the teachers in my school who were like, hey, we see something in him. Let's go ahead and, invest in him. Or it was family members who, when we were homeless at some point, they took us in, right? It was church members who, frankly, I didn't even think I was going to go to college by the time I was ready to graduate high school. It was my college counselor who was like, you need to apply to UCLA. You need to apply to college. It was, family members and church members who were like, hey, we got to keep you on the right pathway. I remember there was one time I had a family member who basically came to get me from a situation and said, look, if you don't change your behavior, you're going to go down a really bad road. Right. And she picked me up and she said, you know what? Look, you're getting older. You don't have the luxury of making mistakes. Like you either need to make some decisions and make things better for yourself and take your own life into your own hands and improve things for yourself, or you're not going to make it.
Right.
And rest her soul, that advice was really influential on me. So it was both the combination of people in my life as well as choices that I made along the way. And the choices were influenced by those people who kept looking out for me. So every single time I was getting ready to make a left instead of a right or go down the wrong path, somebody was there to help me, keep it on track.
Okay. Really interesting. So what, as a kid, obviously, if they're saying apply to UCLA or something, you must have had pretty good grades, or what was it that hooked you, kept you into learning or, going ahead doing your schoolwork despite different things going on in your life?
It's interesting. That's a really interesting question. So at the time, I think getting ready to go to UCLA, like I said, I didn't think I was going to be able to make it to college. I remember having this conversation with my mom and my aunt. And a couple of things. First, it took people believing in me along the way. So yes, I did have pretty decent grades, and I did enjoy school for the most part. Not always, but I did enjoy school for the most part because school for me was like a refuge. It was a place of
Okay.
stability, a place of opportunity. And in Inglewood at the time, right, we had a lot of black teachers who were like, they were about that life. They were like, yo,
Right.
even most of my life, like even from second grade, I remember my second grade teacher who was like, "No, you all are going to learn about Black history. You're going to learn about like we watch Roots in school. You know, you're like
Yes.
the last time we heard about kids watching Roots in school, right? Like these are things that we did, and I think that building of a consciousness over time helped me understand how important education was. And I will say my mom and family always emphasized the importance of education. It was never a situation where they were like, education is not important. And I
Mhm.
think that's how it is in most of our, I think most of our families do that anyway. But I,
Absolutely.
I, took, I
Yeah.
took it to heart, right? I took it to heart. And I think it was just a different set of conditions at the time.
Okay.
Whereas now I think a lot of our young folk, you know, they see through our institutions. They see that they're not relevant. They're not very culturally relevant. They don't teach our young folk about their history often. I mean, we
Yes.
now fortunately have an ethnic studies requirement in certain districts, and
Yes.
but a
Yes.
lot of our young folk they don't get to see themselves in their educational experience. They don't see opportunities in them. Um, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, I think that can be really discouraging for a lot of them.
Absolutely. And I've also been talking about this on the podcast too, because there's also this over testing. I think that really teachers feel a time crunch and they're like, I can't do that. We don't have time for that, like interesting, exciting thing, and because there's a lot more testing.
Yeah.
It really is. So but I think that's what a lot of educators are missing. And again, this is why I really lean in on parents to, take those reins and be like, okay, my child needs this, my child needs that. I'm going to advocate for this at school. Um, because it's easy to get caught up in the testing for teachers, right? Like everybody is leaning in, like you've got to be testing and it's, this creativity stuff. We don't have time for it, and, we literally have those conversations. So when they,
Yeah. No,
it's
I
hard.
agree. The standards movement, I think, in the early '90s, um, moving, from actually starting really in the '80s, right back when Ray Risk wrote A Nation at Risk, and the U.S. was trying to, fight in the Cold War to make sure it had dominance in space and in engineering and
Mm,
science, and
right.
there was sort of this push to, increase educational standards. And to me, there's nothing really wrong with that fundamentally, right? We wanted to improve literacy. There are a lot of folk that still had challenges reading and writing. That's not a problem or a bad thing in and of itself. But the challenge was that I think the standards movement that really began to emerge in the '90s took away the room to actually customize and localize and contextualize education and education opportunities for our young folk. And it did, as you said, it squoze out the time that teachers needed to invest in our students beyond what they were told they could do, right? And that doesn't mean
Well,
that doesn't happen. I know a lot of teachers who very much invest in our young folk. I know that they pour in.
absolutely. I just want
They
to
are
push
doing
back
so much more.
against that a little bit because the standards I feel like are not the issue. Like having a baseline of everyone should be learning this. The issue is the testing. So the amount of time that testing takes, the structure of the test, people are trying to um, do that, and then also, we also don't think about this invisible issue is like these testing organizations are making billions of dollars, right? And so it's I feel like the testing is the issue. Like what to teach is the standards, which
Well,
is
then,
not
then the
bad, but the testing, the time, energy, money, all of that's put into the testing. And they really traumatize teachers. I've talked to traumatized teachers about these testing. Like when our test scores went down, they were on us in such uncomfortable ways. Like I don't want to veer off that trail again and have to deal with that, is what I'm hearing from teachers. And so
Yeah.
again, the unintended consequence is very rigid, not as creative or culturally relevant tasks in the name of let's get them ready for the test.
Yeah.
And that's, ends up being very problematic because then we have kids who are just fed up and they'll be like, I'm not doing it. And they
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And they
I
don't.
agree. And you know what? And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with that. I agree that testing is certainly a challenge. Yet I also maintain that someone set the standards, right?
Yes, for true.
Someone someone set those standards based upon whatever ideology they had, based upon whatever priorities they wanted to set, based upon their political political outcomes they wanted to achieve.
Yes.
Right, we had No Child Left Behind. That sort of really accelerated the move towards deeper testing and more rigorous testing. Right.
Yeah.
So the question to me in my mind is, what makes sense for our communities, for our kids, for our young folk to help
Right.
them thrive and succeed? And again, you're right. There's nothing wrong, and I think I said that there's nothing wrong with having standards and wanting to make sure that everyone can be successful, making sure that
Right.
everyone can succeed in our society. I think that's actually a really good thing to uphold, a really good value to have. The question is how we apply it. And I think to your point, the application of the standards themselves, but the application of the standards, utilizing testing as a way to measure, whether or not students are performing, has really had, to your point, these unintended consequences, or
Right.
maybe they are intended.
We don't know. Yeah.
I'm saying that schools have been designed this way for a long time,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And they were based upon a manufacturing economy. We've now moved towards a service and finance economy. Many schools have really not kept pace with what our society needs in order for our young folk and many students of color themselves to thrive.
Right. And it's important. I mean, like it's notable because you're I want to say something else. Like you're right. When I think about standards, I think more like English standards. But when we think about like social studies standards and science standards, of course it is more agenda based. The English is easy. I could kind of teach any book with the standards or any content with the standards. With English, we have a little bit more autonomy in that way, because it's like you're writing an essay, you're writing a story, you're writing, so it's not, but it could be any story, so. But you're right, with the other standards it is more like politically driven, of course, and we see in other states like Florida and stuff like that,
Yeah,
like really.
yeah.
So I forgot about that. Like a lot of times I really think about English. But the other thing is, one thing that you were saying about like we don't know if it's designed for that. And I'm like, you're right, because originally we did have these tiered things and tiered programs where it's like, okay, you're college going, you're gonna take these classes. Taisha is gonna be just doing
Wood
she's gonna
or
or
mechanics.
working at home as a mom, stay-at-home mom. So we could, home economics, whatever, just really basic things. And, she doesn't need a college level course.
Yeah.
And again, that.
Join us for Well Educated Wednesdays every Wednesday on Instagram Live at Falling for Learning. It is a free parent question and answer session where parents can ask questions, learn about resources, strategies, and tips to make sure their children are on track for learning and stay on track for success. That's every Wednesday on Instagram Live at Falling for Learning. We look forward to seeing you and helping the next generation thrive.
When we think about classes, races, certain schools, okay, this is a Black school. We don't need calculus here. We don't need calculus. We don't need that. We can just do algebra for the kids, pre-algebra, algebra. They graduate with algebra, good. Um, and then now they do have some shifts, but we as community members, as parents, we have to think like, you know, are our kids getting the same thing that the affluent kids are getting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I've worked in both types of schools, and I could say resoundingly no. They're very different, and the way they kind of without, it's like police teaching. They really watch teachers like, you need to be teaching this standard, like this. Would you testing 5 paragraph essay? That's all you. That's really need what you need to do, and they're like strip away the creativity that's in the other schools, and I see that if I'm allowed to do the creativity, if I'm able to do that critical thinking, I'm being prepared to be a boss, to think outside the box, to be innovative, to be a problem solver. And the other way, you're just, and it's very
You're,
basic stuff that you're able to do.
you're
Like
taught to be a worker. You're
yes,
taught
you're
to be
taught to
a
be a
worker.
worker, and you could support that person who's innovative and who thinks hard,
Yeah.
who could problem solve and think outside the box. You could help them. You could be
And I think
their person.
that's why our kids are rejecting this, right? Because they see through the BS. They
Yes.
see through the crap. They're like, look, I can look. So when I was doing my research, so you asked the question you started with was why did you go into education? And I'll tell you the fundamental reason is because I believe that education can be a tool for liberation. That's why.
Yes,
When I
absolutely.
saw what happened to folk in my family, I was like, if we had better educational opportunities, better educational tools, education can really serve our communities in ways that help us be the entrepreneurs, be the architects, and be the engineers for
Yes.
our own neighborhoods, our own communities, right? So for me, education was about showing how we can liberate young folk from within our institutions so that they can go out and be owners of their own
Yes.
destinies and be self-determined and be transformers of their communities. And that's what my programs and that's what a lot of the work that I centered on doing was
Yeah.
really about, helping our young men understand like, no, just because society said you have to act or dress like this doesn't mean you have to. Let me teach you a little bit about the struggle and the history that you came from and teach you about the people that fought to make sure that you can actually sit in this classroom today. Let me help make
Yes.
sure that you understand like what opportunities are available to you so that you don't and how to build brotherhood or sisterhood or familyhood
Yes.
so that
Yes.
you don't feel like you have to go get it from this influence over here, right? Like, so it was really about using education as a tool for civic and social empowerment because at the end of the day, I knew that it was in our minds that we had the power to transform conditions in our communities. And that's why thousands of my young folk graduated high school and made it into college. Students who would have, who frankly, had they been left to these systems, may have never made it through. And
Yeah.
so
That's
that's
a
why I got into it.
and it's wonderful that you say that because some of our young people have built into have bought into like I need to act this way, I need to talk this way, and school isn't cool or it's not whatever, and you know they kind of are self-fulfilling, some of those stereotypes, all of those things. But it's great when we can have people who could come in the community to help to them to reframe it, right? Because it's
Yeah.
not just about being really good in school or whatever, but how are you using your education to create change, um, be innovative, be the boss, and bring support and resources to the community. That's great. So that shifts me now to thinking about your current role in the ARDI. So the Los Angeles County. Tell us what ARDI is again.
It's the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative within the Chief Executive Office of LA County.
Okay. So um, tell us about what you do with that office, please.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the ARDI initiative, or as I mentioned earlier, the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative, was created by the Board of Supervisors. And the Board of Supervisors, for those of you who may not be as familiar with them, they are the governing body for the County of Los Angeles. The County of Los Angeles, as we all know, administers a lot of services, right? They provide for food benefits and housing benefits and public safety benefits, right? The county runs our mental health, public mental health and public health services facilities. And so the county does a lot in our lives as a
Mm-hmm.
regional body. And the Board of Supervisors in 2020, after the death of George Floyd, said, we need to do something about anti-Black racism. We need to do something about the harms that have been committed against our Native American and Indigenous community, against our LGBTQ plus populations, and we need to address these many challenges facing many of our populations who live in concentrated disadvantage, who live in a lot of poverty, who have dealt with historical redlining, right, or policies where Black and
Mm-hmm.
brown folk or Jewish folk or Persians and even Armenians weren't allowed to purchase property in certain neighborhoods, right? We need to address that and get at the root of what we call a structural racism.
Right.
And for those of us who don't really talk about structural racism every day, it's the ways in which institutions, both public and private, make decisions that affect our lives that lead to negative life outcomes. So, we've been talking about education, but let me make this very real. You just made some really good points. You said, I can see how in certain schools, certain, decisions are made where it's like, oh, only Black kids over here are going to get algebra, but the kids over here, more affluent communities, predominantly white communities, right, they're going to get calculus and trigonometry and,
Right.
conceptual physics and all of, right? They're going to get all these incredible math-based courses.
Yes.
But over here in this community, we're going to police those teachers. Those are institutional decisions that are made.
Yes.
When we talk about structural racism, somebody makes a decision that can have a positive or negative impact upon people's lives. So then the children over here in Inglewood or in South LA, they don't get the same opportunities as the children over here in Palos
Right.
Verdes or Palisades or Santa Monica, right? Or Beverly Hills, right?
Yes.
Which are neighborhoods for our national audience that may be listening. Those are neighborhoods that are more affluent than the ones I named previously.
Right.
So structural racism shows up in how we make decisions that affect people's lives, because ultimately it leads to certain outcomes. The kids in the school where they don't get all the same math opportunities, and I know that because I went to a school like that, right? I know where we only had 4 AP courses. So by the time I got to UCLA and I talked to other people, they had like 20 AP courses. I was like, wait a minute,
Yes.
how come we only 4? And I
Yeah.
only got to take 1 or 2 during my time in high school, right?
Yeah.
So I know those disparities because I lived them, right? And it
Yes.
made a difference in terms of the opportunities I was able to take advantage of when I got to UCLA, or the work that I had to do when I got there, the additional
Yes.
tutoring I had to pursue, the staying up late, all the things that you have to do to be successful in college, which I was perfectly okay with doing, but had to make sure that I did extra to
Yeah.
catch up. And so, again, didn't speak to my capability, didn't speak to my desire. And I think that's what we see in a lot of our young folk, right? A lot of them are incredibly capable. They're very smart. They're very thoughtful. They're very,
Yes.
if they see people believe in them and invest in them, they'll thrive. So in Artie, our goal is to build an agenda, a policy agenda that helps to drive improvement in people's lives, improvement in the lives of our young folk, improvement in education. So one of our primary we set 5 goals for the county. And one of them is to improve the attainment of post-secondary, so that's after high school, educational credentials. That could be a vocational certificate or a
Mhm.
trade school program or a college degree, but post-secondary educational credentials that have what we call as labor market value, meaning you can go actually earn a living in
Okay.
LA County, because we know that in order for you, if you're a family of 4 and you need to do at least decently well, you need to earn around $83,000 a year to just pay your rent and pay for
Yes. In
food.
Los Angeles.
And
Yes.
I like it, right? Like $82,000 is a lot of money
Mm-hmm.
for people to survive. And if you're only making $22,000, $25,000 a year, you're in poverty in LA.
Yes, man. Yes.
So
Yeah.
understanding that, right, our office has helped to work with our many county departments to set goals to move into a direction that's improving people's lives. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is make sure that people, everyone, it doesn't matter, regardless of your race, your color, your creed, your religion, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, whatever it is, that you are healthy, that you experience justice, and you thrive. Because
Mm,
we want to get to a place where race is no longer a predictor in your success. We want to get to a place where gender is no longer a predictor in your success, or sex is no longer a predictor in your success. So we want to make
right.
sure that every single person has an equal opportunity and an equal chance to thrive, to be self-determined, to live a valuable life, to contribute to our society, and to be able to live in safety and live without fear of being attacked. We just saw this swastika incident in San Pedro again, right? Like,
Mm,
we hear the stories and see the news articles of Black families that are getting lower appraisals, or
yes.
city council members that are like, we want to cut off the Oaxacans in Korea, or the Koreans in Koreatown, so that they don't have as much voting power, right? Dilute their voting power. So we're trying to make sure that all people in LA get a fair shot to have a thriving life.
Yeah. Well, great. So thank you so much for telling us about that and really going into that. Because I think, the county sometimes, or, wherever you live, sometimes those governments are kind of like invisible. Like we don't always know what they're doing and what how they factor in. Of course, we live by the laws, or we find out, this is how much tax is or whatever is going on, but we don't always know. So that's why it's really good for you to be here and for you to talk to parents about like what kind of programs are available for parents if they're like in crisis, or they're having some of those issues. Like, what do you all offer? How can they get support?
Well, first of all, I want to extend my sympathies to many of our families who've been working hard to recover from the pandemic, right? I think the pandemic hit a lot of us hard. And with inflation as well, it's been incredibly difficult for many of us to do well, to thrive. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, there have been so many challenges we've been dealing with. And I know that folk are like, oh, our economy is doing well and we're at good employment. The reality is, you can be employed, but you can also be underemployed, right?
Yes.
You can be fully employed and not be making enough money to pay your rent, because rents are skyrocketing, as at some
Yes.
point they had in Inglewood, by up to 127%. When your rent
Mm.
goes from 1250 to 2750,
Whew.
that's a problem. Okay. I don't
Yes.
care what people say, that is a problem. So the
Yeah.
county has launched a number of programs for rent relief. So I would invite you to check out our Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. We have an LA County rent relief program that's spending our American Rescue Plan Act dollars. These are dollars that came from the federal government to
Okay.
help us recover from the pandemic. If you want to learn more about the rent relief program, you can go to our ceo.lacounty.gov/recovery website. It tells you about all the programs that are available for you. There's food assistance programs. There are educational assistance programs through our libraries. There's tutoring and laptop lending programs
All
where you can
right.
go to our public libraries to actually
So
access
wait a minute. So
laptop
you, oh, okay. So the laptops are at the library where you could access them.
public
Okay.
libraries. So if your child needs access to, I think at some point we had Wi-Fi and hotspot lending programs. And
Okay.
so things to help your children thrive, things to help our families thrive, rent relief, job assistance program. If you were formerly incarcerated, we have a fair chance hiring program through our Department of Economic Opportunity, to
Okay.
make sure that you can make it through and hopefully get employed, with a record, right? And so there are a number of things that the county is doing, and I wish there was more that we can, a greater way to get the word out. So I appreciate you sharing this
Yes,
on
we'll
your.
put all the links in the program summary. Yep.
My office as well is launching a program called Community Navigators, and we're going to be helping people in community through nonprofit organizations and community-based organizations and small businesses learn about these programs and services. So I invite you to still check us out. So if you want
Yes.
to, again, learn about our Community Navigators program, go to the ceo.lacounty.gov/recovery website, and you'll learn more about that program as well. So there's a lot of opportunities out there that I invite people to take advantage of.
Yes, we will have all the links that he's mentioning in the program summary, so you can access it directly. And so, yeah, so we need to think about what's there and, reach out when we need help before it's too late. Something that you mentioned is that you were homeless when you were younger. And that is, well, I grew up in Alaska and we still had that, we dealt with that issue. And then my husband also dealt with that issue. So it's like a really common issue, especially with Black people, where we have some issues being housed for various reasons, right? Because sometimes people don't rent to Black people, or, we weren't able to have that generational wealth from buying homes. And, you're always in a renting situation. And if something goes wrong, for renters, it's easier to become homeless than if you have your house. You have a lot more if you have a house that you own. There's a, a longer path to getting homeless when you have a home than it is when you are renting from someone. It's a lot easier to be out on the street.
Yeah.
So it's a common issue, and nothing to be ashamed of. If you need help, please reach out and access these programs. They're here to be used. Are there any programs that are like really underutilized, like they don't really use that often, and more people should take advantage of them?
It's a great question. I don't know if I can say that they're underutilized, but what I will say, especially when it comes to housing and homelessness, is that the county has made, through generous support from our taxpayers, has made significant investments in our homeless rehousing system. And if you want to learn more about how to take advantage of those programs, our Department of Health Services provides, our Housing for Health program. Also, the LA Housing Services Authority, Homeless Services Authority, LAHSA, makes available programs depending on where you live. And what we know, I mean, to your point about Black folk, and we actually see a rise in Latinos experiencing homelessness as well. Black folk are disproportionately represented in our homeless population, right?
Yeah.
Of like 75,000 people that are homeless, about 30 some odd percent of them are Black, and so which far exceeds our population threefold. So we're about roughly 10% of LA's population, and yet we're 30% of the homeless population.
Yeah.
So what I think that reflects, to me, homelessness is a byproduct of racism in America. And I think
Yes.
our we had a committee called the Black People Experiencing Homelessness Committee that my office now sort of leads, that was started under the LA Homeless Services Authority. They came to that conclusion, right? That was their sort of framing, that homelessness is the byproduct of racism in America because it's the result of the failure of all of our systems, the result of the failure of markets, the result of the failure of our public systems themselves. And so, I would invite people to really explore those services through LAHSA, or if you live in the city of Los Angeles itself, through HACLA, which is their housing authority there as well. And I know that these programs can sometimes be very difficult to navigate, but you gotta stick through it, right? You gotta push through it. The other thing I would encourage people to look into, again, is our Department of Economic Opportunity, because they provide workforce development programs. They can help you, get your resume up to date through our American Job Centers.
Okay.
Our youth, the Youth Build programs can help young folk move into trade and job opportunities, right? So there are higher LAX is out there if you want to move into the trades. If you want to be in the construction field as well. So there are a number of opportunities. The community colleges have trade programs, and I know there can be a challenge to access these programs, but if you reach out, there are people there that can help you navigate. If you're a small business owner, the Office of Small Business in the Department of Economic Opportunity helps to work to get small businesses access to programs and opportunities. If you want to do business with LA County, we have an entire sort of website and set of programs dedicated to helping people do business with LA County. So if you just Google doing business with LA County, DBW, doing business with LA County, it has a whole bunch of links that you can join to learn how to sign up, be a vendor or a contractor, or learn about contracts, or get on notification lists when contracts come out. The county is a $44 billion institution. That's a lot of money spent here in our region, and one of the largest employers in California. Take advantage of an opportunity to be a contractor, or as a small business, to or be an entrepreneur as a small business to try and work with LA County and provide support for the services and or the programs and products that are needed to help support your neighbors.
Okay. All right. So that's awesome. Again, all of the links will be in the program summary. Um, so as we're about to close up, like what message do you have for parents as they guide their children through learning and growing, or what insight can you offer to parents?
As a parent of three myself, and my son is now in high school, he's a ninth grader. I have a daughter who's in elementary and a young one who's the boss of the house, and she's running around telling us what to do. So I'm sure she's going to tell her teachers what to do. So as parents, I would say, no, there is no greater advocate for your children than you. And we know this, right? We're parents. I don't think a single one of us wake up in the morning thinking, I want to prevent my child from having the best possible life that they can. I think we all wake up, most of us at least, wake up thinking, I want to give my child the best opportunity. And I know a lot of parents out there. I've worked with a lot of parents. Even if you don't know how to make some of these things happen, you gotta ask. You gotta push. You gotta be a pain or thorn in the side of the school officials, of the government officials, because we are all here to, we're being paid to do a job to serve our children and serve
Yes.
families. And even though it may get on my nerves, or even though it may be a challenge, or even though it might make your teacher a little bit upset, it doesn't matter, because
No.
that's your I
Yeah.
don't care how frustrated that's your child. And these are our children. And we got to be the advocates for these children, because at the end of the
Absolutely.
day, we got to be the ones to make sure these systems work. Because I will tell you, those parents on the West Side and those affluent communities, they don't play around. They
I
are
can
advocates.
testify to it. Yeah.
They don't care who gets fired. They don't care who gets to keep their job or not. They will fight to make sure that their children's needs are taken care of, because if you as a public official, as a teacher, as whomever, if you're not doing your job to make sure that their children are benefiting,
Right.
they don't want you in that job. They want the right person in that job.
Right.
So look, I'm not saying that our teachers in our communities don't care, because I do believe they do. I work with a lot of them. I've been in the classroom.
Yes.
What I am saying is, as parents, ultimately it's on us to band together, to advocate, to push for what we want and what we believe will improve the outcomes for our children in our
Yes.
school.
Yes. And they don't know if you don't tell them. They may think everything's okay. And, if you're not pointing out this a blind spot or this gap in services, then they won't know. So
That's right.
that's why a lot of services are in place, because someone said, hey, we don't have anything going on here. We don't have Wi-Fi. So how are we going to access the online classes? You know?
Right.
And so without people knowing that, they're not at home with you and they don't know what's going on. You have to advocate, because you assume sometimes that people know, but they don't. They don't know. Um,
That's right.
thank you
Your
so
voice,
much.
I think that's right. The final thing I'll say is, to our parents, your voice is your power.
Oh,
Your
yeah.
voice is your power. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on the Falling for Learning podcast. We really appreciate you. And for those of you listening, please lean in on, getting the support that your kids need.
yeah,
Thank you.
I appreciate being here. Thank you so much for having me. And excited to see, the work that will emerge from this incredible podcast.
Thank you.
You got it.
Thanks again for supporting the Falling for Learning podcast. New episodes go live every Saturday at 5 p.m. You can watch us on youtube.com at Falling for Learning, or listen on all major podcast platforms such as Apple, Google, Audible, Spotify, and much more. For more resources, visit fallinginlovewithlearning.com. We really appreciate you. Have a wonderful week.